been very upset at any unnecessary tension between the people of Poland ever since the Solidarity movement, when communism fell, and the Jewish community. It was always ridiculous to me. I always was so grateful for what the modern country and government of Poland has done for Holocaust memory. I need not enter into long, lengthy discussions of that because I've written so many articles about it. I have visited Auschwitz and Birkenau, unfortunately, so many times. And the other Nazi German extermination camps that were built on Polish soil, where 3 million of the 6 million Jews were murdered. I was there when Elisha Wiesel was the keynote speaker for March of the Living, a few months after his illustrious father, Elie Wiesel, the world's most famous Holocaust survivor and the greatest ever witness to genocide. After his passing, I went with Elisha there. I remember standing at crematoria number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, wondering, it was so hard to say it, did Elisha's aunt, Tzipora, after whom the Elie Wiesel schools and Elie and Mariam Wiesel schools in Ashkelon in Israel, where we now have family, was a little girl, was she murdered in this crematoria? Elisha's grandmother, was she murdered in this crematoria in Auschwitz? And then his grandfather, dying in Buchenwald with his father, surviving, thank God, at the age of 16. Elisha and I had a very important meeting about some of the frictions between the Polish and Jewish communities with high-ranking Polish representatives. I was very impressed that they took that meeting and spoke to us with incredible dignity and respect. Friends can have differences, but the fighting was always so stupid. It was stupid from the Jewish community side because it did not show gratitude to the people of Poland who've done so much to remember the lost, murdered millions of Jews by the Nazi Germans. It took only a one-sided view of Jewish and Polish history, which is almost 1,000 years old, has many tragedies, many horrors, and many illustrious moments. And who would have thought it would have taken someone as evil as Vladimir Putin, truly the face of evil in our time, a monster, who was a monster before the Ukrainian invasion. He was a monster when he murdered his own people. He was a monster when he quashed every form of dissent. He was a monster when he snatched Crimea, Georgia, the invasion in Georgia. Now we see him killing innocent people in Bucha, and we suddenly woke up. But did it really take someone like Vladimir Putin to bring the Polish and Jewish nations closer together? That should never have to happen. But if that's one of the positive consequences of this otherwise horrible story of Putin's devastation, barbaric devastation of Ukraine, then let that be one of the very positive things. I can't believe what's happening in Ukraine. I can't even find words for it. And my greatest fear is that we're going to get a little bit tired of all these images and we're going to forget. I just wrote a book called Kosher Hate. It's about hating evil, to stop evil. We never hated this Putin guy or all these other autocrats who slaughter and murder their people. And of course, they're going to slaughter and murder anyone who doesn't bend the knee. I'm sick of people like this. I don't think the problem in our world right now is we don't have enough love, although we always need more love. We always need. But part of it is we don't have enough hate. We don't have enough kosher hate. We're supposed to hate evil. We didn't hate Hitler enough, so he ends up invading Poland, the same country, that now has absorbed 2.5 million refugees. He invades Poland the 1st of September 1939 because we never hated him enough to stop him. It was Churchill who said he hated Hitler. But we Jews have no issue with not bigotry, anti-Semitism, right? God, we have a problem with all those things. We have no issue with kosher hate, hatred of evil. And for those of you who had issues with the Polish government or the Law and Justice Party, or okay, so we have our issues. Discuss them as brothers, as friends, work them out. I mentioned the other night when we had the honor of hosting Adrian and Elisha for Shabbos dinner, I have an issue with the Polish restitution law. I've expressed it. I had an issue with the Polish Holocaust law. None of that changed the deep love and gratitude I have to the Polish people that I feel whenever I'm there for everything they've done for Holocaust memory, for 1,000 years of Jewish history and the illustrious moments of that history, for their incredible support of Israel at the EU. You can't forget those things, and I never forgot those things. I walk around Poland with my yarmulke, my tzitzis. I haven't been now because of COVID in 2 years, but I was last there days before the COVID lockdowns on the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. I walk with my yarmulke and my tzitzis, and I am treated with nothing but respect at all times. I was at the Warsaw, before Putin and Ukraine, I was at the Warsaw Security Conference. Was it 2018? I was in Warsaw with my son Mendy when Poland alone hosted a conference with the Trump administration, the American government, against Iran. And for the first time brought together the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, with Prime Minister Morawiecki, and the Saudi foreign minister. It happened on Polish soil, in Warsaw, when everyone else was afraid to take on Iran. And we're about to have a deal with Iran. Another American, sorry, I don't want to put Adrian as a diplomat in any uncomfortable positions, but I'm totally opposed to this new JCPOA, this new Iran deal. They're a disgusting government, and I thank the people of Poland years ago for standing up to that kind of aggression with the state of Israel, with the United States. I'm so happy President Biden was just in Poland. I'm so happy that we're strengthening our alliance and that Vice President Kamala Harris was there. I'm so happy to see the friendship between the Republicans, Democrats on every side. Adrian will always have our issues, but you're like a brother to me. We're very close. There's a deep love and friendship between us. We discuss issues openly. We don't sweep anything under the carpet. You've hosted us here many times. I'm grateful for the openness that you've always shown. And as I've always said, you're an incredible ambassador of your people, of the Polish people and the Polish government, and thank you for hosting us here. If I've gone on a little bit, I apologize. I really did want to acknowledge this. This is kind of a breakthrough moment, that even if we never sweep anything under the carpet, there will be real appreciation, gratitude, and love between our peoples always. My grandfather was born in Poland. He was born in Lumja. I visited there. So let me finally say that in the modern world, there has rarely been a story as morally heroic as one nation taking in nearly the equivalent of 10% of their own population in about a month. And as you said Friday night, Poland has not set up one refugee camp. That means people are not in tents, they're in people's homes, and that's remarkable, and that really deserves to be applauded. Let's all do that now. With that, I'm going to turn this over to the Consul General of Poland, Adrian Kubicki. I want to welcome my very dear friend Alicia Wiesel, who's like a brother to me. Deep love between our families, and we do so many things together. Alicia and I study the Talmud almost every day, almost because he misses so many days. That's actually me. The way this is going to work is Adrian's going to welcome everybody, and then we're going to have a conversation. It's going to be fast-paced, and then we'll go to your questions. Consul General Adrian Kubicki.
Thank you very much, Rabbi, and thank you to each and every one of you who showed up today in this not so great weather-wise afternoon for this conversation. The aim of this conversation is to make it informative to you, so you know firsthand of what is going on in Poland, what is going on in Ukraine right now, what needs are right now on the table in order to provide the assistance to refugees, but also what other forms of help can be provided to Ukraine and Ukrainian people in this difficult time, which we will all know, by the way, as a way of introducing the matter, will be a problem that is long run, not the short run. So what we are talking about here is not just something that happened within past month and a half, which will end anytime soon, and all of those people who fled Ukraine will suddenly go back to their country, to their homes, because most of those homes are not existing anymore. So this is very substantial, so we keep having this conversation, so we have this understanding, common understanding of the issue. On more general note, just so you know, Rabbi Shmuley, I think, was here long before I got to New York. That makes him a little bit more of a host even than I. And since I came here, obviously it was a COVID, it was not an easy time, but if you remember, we met at the Kaddish that we prayed for your father. It was some time ago. We developed in some way certain form of friendship, which to those of you who know Rabbi Shmuley, you know it's not an easy thing. So I think we can congratulate ourselves that very much. I'm very humbled and honored that we have Alicia Wiesel here with us, who over this time and thanks to the hospitality of Rabbi Shmuley became a dear friend to myself and to the Consulate as well. As Rabbi Shmuley said, by the way, I'm very grateful for every word of support, for so many gestures of appreciation towards Poland, towards our people. With that being said, I still want to keep this conversation very honest and open. So we will try to cover some of the topics by answering questions prepared very carefully and in details by Rabbi Shmuley. But also, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to answer them. And as a final note, I would love to see this place, Consulate of Poland, place which could be a source of reliable information to all of you regarding all the issues. Obviously, there are different point of views on different subjects, especially if it comes to the complex issue of Polish Jewish, Polish Israeli, Polish, any form of bilateral relations between Poland and the US, a Jewish community here, Jewish community in Israel. There are a lot of questions, but we would like to keep these doors downstairs open. So anytime you would like to wish to find out what we have to say, and we will be always honest with you, please remember that address, it's always open for you. And we believe that this is just a start. This is not about Poland, it's mainly about the Ukraine. But we will, I hope to keep that conversation ongoing about everything what unites us, everything what divides us, to build this relation for the future, because this is the aim. Regardless of any issues that we might have, the Polish and Jewish relations are so long-lasting, and we have so many centuries ahead to develop those relations for the sake of both of our nations. So please remember you're always welcome here, and I hope you find this conversation very informative. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Alicia, is Vladimir Putin Hitler?
No. No, I mean, Vladimir Putin is not Hitler. It's that doesn't mean that what he's doing isn't terrible. It doesn't mean that what he's doing are not war crimes. And if civilians are really being targeted the way we're shockingly learning and seeing on the news these days, then these are terrible things for which he will and should be judged. But I don't think that comparing him to Hitler is necessarily useful.
Okay. And I agree. But Vladimir Putin is not Hitler. We agree with that. He's a war criminal according to the President of the United States. We don't know what the ICC or the UN will say. But the President of Ukraine is saying that he's engaging in genocide. Now, as the son of the most famous witness to genocide, I know you take your father's legacy extremely seriously, also at the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity, do you think that this can be characterized as a genocide?
You know, I wish I was more of an expert as opposed to being an armchair expert consuming all the news that we all are consuming day in, day out on this topic, as we should be. I don't know whether one can say that the invasion of his state to the west is truly something that is primarily motivated by racial hatred, or whether it's just a man who has insane aims, paranoid visions of a world being out to get him, and who has badly miscalculated on what the West's reaction would be to aggression to the West. But is it genocide? I'm not sure. When I think of genocide, frankly, I think much more of what's going on with China and the Uyghurs, where it's a very clear case of a certain ethnicity being rounded up, put into concentration camps. This to me looks like unprovoked aggression, which should be condemned in the strongest terms. Maybe we will learn that there is some ethnic element to it that qualifies it being a genocide. I'm not there yet. I'm not saying I couldn't get there, but I'm not there yet.
Okay. And
Can I?
But yes, let's go in. Yeah.
Just very quickly.
I was going to.
On that note, I think I agree with Alicia that putting a name tags right now on what is going on in Ukraine, it's not necessarily useful, especially that it forces us or distracts us from the evil that is definitely going on and from stopping it immediately where it is right now, to sort of this theoretical discussion where we go to accounting how many casualties are there at this moment. Is it accountable as a genocide or not? Even if there is one single person, one single individual that has not been a casualty of war by accident, but as a target, it is still terrible, and it still should be fought against.
So you're both agreeing that. Okay.
I have a question for Shmuel.
This is such a sensitive subject, and I want to proceed very delicately. You're both.
Do we also, by the way, get to hit the ball back over the net?
No, of course, yeah. But the last thing I wanted to actually say, Alicia, then I was going to kick it over to Adrian, was, okay, you said it's not the Holocaust. I agree with you, and Putin's not Hitler. You said he could be a war criminal and evil and a murderer, but that doesn't mean he's Hitler, and those comparisons are never helpful. And you also are saying that you're not sure this is a genocide, but so many innocent people are dying, it doesn't have to be a genocide, and then Adrian's echoing that sentiment. But again, final thing, as Elie Wiesel's son, you're watching all these refugees. Does it touch you as the son of a survivor to see this? Do you make comparisons in your mind? Has it made you feel that anything toward Poland absorbing them? Like, you are looking this, you say you're an armchair expert, but you are Elie Wiesel's son. You're a son of a survivor, mother and your father. Do you see this through the prism of their experience as refugees who came here, who came to France, came to the United States?
Look, of course I see it through that perspective, Shmuley, but, there's a definition of tshuva, of repentance, and you being a rabbi will be much more precise in knowing the source of this thought, but tshuva is said to be when you have the opportunity to do the same exact thing in the same exact circumstances and you make a different decision. That is the height of repentance. Look, what's happening today is profoundly different than what happened in World War II. The Nazis had invaded Poland, and famine, terror, the invasion of your country, the persecution of the Jews, many terrible choices were made. And there also were righteous among the nations. This is not the same because the troops are not on Polish soil today. The gun is pointed at a distance. It's not against the head of the Polish people. The gun is still some distance away. And even so, even though these are not the exact same circumstances, look at what this generation of Poles are doing en masse. If we argue, Shmuley, in some of our friendly debates, whether it's with Prime Minister Morawiecki or whether it's with Adrian himself about, well, yes, there were righteous nations, but there were also many who were not righteous, and we don't talk about them enough, or we think all these ratios. Look at what is happening en masse through the actions of the elected government of Poland, through the actions of the many, many families. I mean, what amazed me the most when I'm listening to this is what you said about the refugee camps. People are opening up their homes in Poland. We're going to take 2, we'll take 3, we'll take them here. And they're finding a way to just make their homes bigger to accommodate, and their hearts bigger to accommodate. It's unbelievable. And I think we owe the Polish people hakarat hatov, recognition of the good, because maybe that's something we all need to do a little more of, even if it's with people we've had tricky relationships with in the past.
Well, okay. Adrian, is one of the reasons, again, this is the only, for me, the Holocaust portion, because that's one of the things that united us before this Russian invasion. Are the people of Poland opening their hearts and their homes, literally, is part of that because of the World War II experience, that they remember what happened to them, the aggression, they're watching Ukraine and they're saying, we know exactly what this feels like?
Well, we pay attention to educate our children in terms of what was the experience of the Second World War, but not only that. Poland had issues and has been invaded occupied by Russia for so many times in our history, not just by Soviets during the Second World War or by Nazis, Germans during the Second World War. So it is still somehow vivid. We still have that in our veins. But obviously, I think this is also from my personal perspective, I think this is the most beautiful part of it, is that we didn't really had the time to think this through. If you look at the decisions that has been made right after this war started, right after Russia invaded Ukraine, how people reacted instinctively, you see that there was no calculation, basically, no thinking this through. It was very, very honest gesture of people who decided, let's grab our cars, just go to the border, and as Alicia said, like take 2, 3, 4 families, children, etc., to our households. So subconsciously, I think it is something that we feel that if we have been offered with such an assistance when the Second World War started, or any former conflicts, it would probably prevent from going to so extreme. If we had allies maybe acting in a different way, the turn of events could have been completely different. And we really honestly don't want to see the history repeating itself. And you see that on at least 2 levels. One level is the individuals, ordinary Polish people, just jumping to help Ukrainians however they can. And I promise you, I don't know if I know a single person in Poland who's not involved, directly or indirectly. So that's one level. But secondly, we have a Polish government who decided very immediately that we have to open our borders wide, without asking too many questions. Just any proof of identity allows to cross the border and being admitted to Poland, regardless of the ethnicity of people, because there are not just Ukrainians crossing the border, so many people of different nationalities, including quite significant amount of Jews. So they all come to Poland. The borders remain open. Also remember, I hope we get into it a little bit, that in that mass of people, you mainly see mothers with children. You might not really see that within this group there are so many people with very special needs, like orphans, for instance, like people with disabilities, people with certain medical conditions. So not always is enough that the families are opening their homes. How state and how Polish government acts, both on the federal level and the local level, is also important, because those people with special needs need to be provided with the special assistance, and it has to be coordinated. Remember that there are so many issues that we don't even think of. We estimate that around 200,000 children has been affected with the child trafficking. It's tragic, but it's there. So many evil people try to take advantage of the situation, so it has to be addressed. We have to protect these children. Also, once we accept the refugees, once they come to Poland, our goal is to treat them rather like guests than the refugees. And by that, I mean we try to accommodate them to be fully functioning within the structures of our society as quickly as it's possible. And for instance, another nearly 200,000 of children has been already accepted to Polish educational system, which is quite an effort. So many jobs being offered both by private sector and the government sector to Ukrainians who came and are willing to work. They want to be fully functioning to some extent, become independent as soon as possible. Because also, as what I said in my introduction, this is not a short run. We have to be ready for a long run. On one hand, we wish those Ukrainians are being given choice whether they want to go back safely to their home after war as soon as possible. Obviously, we all pray and act towards that. But on the other hand, we know that it will take months, maybe even years, for them to be able to come back to their country. So we need to have a plan that is not only for the time being, but it's substantial, and the plan and coordination that will work for years to come.
Truly a Herculean effort. Alicia?
Are you asking me, or is it my turn to ask you a question?
We're going to have a conversation.
So here's the question that I have for you, Shmuley, and for you, Adrian. I'm curious to hear if you have thoughts on this. Do we have ethical ADD in this country? Are we only able to focus on one thing at a time? And the moment Will Smith slaps Chris Rock, we all sort of forget for a moment about what's going on in the Ukraine until it comes back the next day. We have a massive attack, 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps in China. And it's not as, in some sense, it's not as easy to get angry about China. China is so big. Yes, we were able to pull Russia out of the Western financial system to some extent. How would we ever do that with China? I mean, it just boggles the mind. And you think about the Beijing Olympics that recently happened, where Xi and Putin met, and there was this embrace and this implicit connection between these two countries. So I wonder a little bit: is it us? Are we not able to process one moral atrocity, more than one moral atrocity at the time? Or is the problem just with the world? We shouldn't have to process more than one moral atrocity at one time, and yet somehow we're being asked to.
Well, that's a phenomenal question. Let me relate it for a moment to our guests. A lot of people were accusing Poland prior to the Russian invasion of not caring about immigrants, of not caring about refugees. It was one of the main criticisms of the Law and Justice Party, the people in Poland in general, and the Law and Justice Party in particular. And then this terrible crisis came about, and the people of Poland rose to the occasion and kind of dispelled that idea and rose to the occasion. I mean, even as Adrian discusses what it takes to absorb 2.5 million people, and it boggles the mind. So sometimes every country has moral ADD, and then a great crisis arises and they rise to the occasion. Why do we call it the greatest generation that defeated Hitler? Because that was the greatest crisis this country ever faced. Hitler was the greatest moral crisis the world ever faced. On the other hand, the world ignored him for so many years. The world had moral ADD, and until it was too late. Now let me focus it on me in America, and I am really troubled by the state, our personal state, all of us, the state of our politics. I think the state of American politics is absolutely embarrassing. I think it's disgusting. These moral issues, these foreign policy issues, they almost never come up. The things that come up are so stupid as to be almost embarrassing. No wonder so many people are checked out of politics. I have friends who are running for office right now. A lot of them were smart, highly educated. I mean, Democrats, Republicans. The moment you want to win a primary, you just go to the extreme of that party. You forego anything that you believed before, and people wonder why there's no change in this country. So I said to myself, why is this happening? How could Putin kill so many people and nobody cares? How could China kill all the Uyghurs? You cared. You took out a full page ad in the New York Times. Why does nobody care? And so I said to myself, is it because we don't love enough? There's a lot of love. People are decent. People are really decent. It's because we don't know how to hate evil. We just don't know how to hate evil. We don't know how to hate a government that will lock people like Uyghurs up, because our iPhones only cost $1,000, which is also expensive, instead of $3,000. Because if they were built in California, it would cost $3,000. And no, we all want cheap stuff. Listen, right now, over cheap gas, we might let Putin off the hook too. But what if our hatred of evil was sufficient that we said, no, you know what? I can't compromise myself on this. I just hate the guy too much. I personally, I have a lot of shortcomings. I never was wrong about Putin. I said this stuff about Putin for years. I was prepared to criticize my beloved state of Israel over Putin, my beloved United States of America over Putin. He was always a monster. I freaking hate someone who kills people because they want to be free. Isn't that what America is? Isn't that what America is? And I'll tell you, that's the reason I always had a soft spot for Poland. Were there Polish individual collaborators of the Nazis who murdered Jews? Of course there were. There were throughout Europe. But the Polish government, they were one of the only ones that never collaborated, and we all forget that. They just never did. The French collaborated and rounded up 80,000 Jews and sent them to Auschwitz. And yet Jews don't feel about France what they feel about Poland, which always, like, surprises me. You have to hate evil. You have to hate evil. Will Smith isn't evil. What he did was really bad, but he's not evil. I don't think anyone's going to say he's evil. But Putin? Are we really going to forget this? Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran? There's no hatred of evil. Alicia, there's a debate about your father's legacy. Your father was a man of love, humanitarianism, but there were also, things that he wrote that was really angry about what had happened at Auschwitz. There was righteous indignation, and I don't hear that anymore. I don't hear righteous indignation. And I have to give President Biden a lot of credit, because before this Russian invasion, he was asked, was it by... what's his name, from ABC News? Who asked him, do you consider Putin a killer? And he said, yes, I do. And that was like a year ago. And then calling him a war criminal, which he is. So I have no problem with Jews having issues with Poland, other friends. But when you can't distinguish between true evil and just people who you strongly disagree with, and even if they're wrong, and even if they have moral issues, as do we as well, that's the problem. So it's not about, I don't think it's about ethical ADD, to answer your question. I think it's about a broken moral compass where we cannot make binary decisions, and we excuse evil so much and it keeps on coming up. We saw the telltale signs of Putin. We knew this was coming. We did nothing in 2014. He was completely forgiven.
But you know what? I think that it's very difficult to speak in any positive manner in regard of what's going on right now. And we don't want to do that, but there is a huge opportunity here for all of us. As Rabbi said, we are kind of pushed right now into learn or swallow higher prices for the means, the items, the gas that we're using every day. And because of the photos, because of this footage that it's so close to us, we can see people suffering. This is something that we might actually survive and pass through. And where are we going to wake up? I think in the war, it's a chance. It's not a promise, but it is a chance that we're going to wake up in the world where we all agree that Putin crossed the line and there is no way back from this point forward. So we must condemn it, and we must bring the changes not only for Ukraine, which is fighting for their own freedom, but I think to some extent to expand the democratic values to broader perspective, and maybe even bring the changes to Russia and to the Russian nation. So there is an opportunity to it, and I don't want to make any forecasts how far can we go with this, let's say, revolution, if that would be any form of revolution in our approach towards things, accepting, as Rabbi said, that we have to contribute to some extent to finally make a world a better place. But maybe, this will cause a changes and wave of changes, not only regional, but maybe we'll go any farther. So I think that this is a real opportunity we have. I mean, obviously, I don't want to sound naive. There are different dynamics that are driving the situation. But as long and to the extent it's up to us, I think we're facing a huge opportunity to fight it once and for good.
Well, I want to turn the question to you, Alicia. We're going to get the question soon, please, everybody. Look,
I feel like I come in the middle.
Sorry to dig even deeper into this, but I represent myself. I try to represent the Jewish people. I'm an American. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I wear yarmulke. But you represent your father, and he only has one son and one child. And your father was the most... President Obama, who was in the White House yesterday, called him the conscience of the world. What do you feel towards what's happening in Ukraine? How does it... carrying a legacy like that and seeing this kind of crisis, which is not the Holocaust, we said, and it is different to the Second World War, but it involves millions of refugees. It involves state-sponsored aggression. There's a lot of bad stuff. What do you feel about this moral ADD? How are you feeling over the past few weeks in terms of your own responsibilities as an American, as Elie Wiesel's son, as a Jew, etc.? What are you feeling?
I feel we're at a sort of moment of truth. I think that this question of how is the West going to react is going to be a defining moment for us. Are we going to have the nerve, are we going to have the steel that it requires to face down a dictator who needs to be stopped? There's no other way to say it. And I look at it and I sort of hope that our generation has what it takes, that we have the patience to pay higher gas prices, higher grain prices, that we have that patience that Adrian described. And I think it's, in many ways it's not as hard, and hopefully it doesn't get as hard as what the greatest generation had to go through, but let us rise to this challenge the way that we can. And you mentioned your praise for the Biden administration on this. I have to say, I think the Biden administration, I agree with you, has really been terrific. The way that they saw this coming, warned Ukraine, gave them all the information, and essentially, said, hey, we know, and we want you to know that we know. I think that approach was actually very smart, and I hope that the U.S. continues showing increasing resolve for what's needed to dethrone Putin. So I look at it and I feel actually a mixture of revulsion for the terror that's been created, but I feel some amount of hope that maybe, as Adrian said, it's a moment of optimism that we can come together and start shaping foreign policy around ideals once again, and around a real sense of justice and not always of expedience. And God willing, I hope that that translates also into the Iran deal, which you mentioned as well. Maybe it'll be a little bit of a wake-up call that when you're dealing with terror, that this posture of continuing to make concession after concession only creates more problems down the road. I hope that that lesson is heard and learned.
Where are they today? What people call right-wing elements, or the extreme right, or the far right, or and they exist in every society. Are they being vocal? Are they saying this is a terrible mistake, Poland's going to lose its national character, we're not Ukrainians, they have a different culture, different everything? Are they, because I don't hear them at all, are they not there?
Well, I think deep inside, probably individuals might have expressed such concerns. But I think if anyone tries to be more cautious of how far we go with supporting Ukraine, is rather out of concern that we also have the issues that we still have to discuss with Ukraine and Ukrainian nation regarding certain events in the history that have been difficult, and this discussion is still to take place.
Especially
but
in the
I
Second
think,
World War, where a lot of Ukrainians joined the SS, stuff like that, which
Yes.
we hear in the Jewish community as well, right? Yeah.
Yes. Also, the genocide that has been committed on Polish people, and many difficult moments in the history. And it's not that we are making that irrelevant right now. It is relevant, and this is discussion to come. We will definitely have this discussion when the moment is right. But I think that the sense of the need of helping those people against these atrocities and because of the horror they're facing makes the Polish nation and Polish people amazingly united. This is why any voices that are being raised kind of to slow down the pace in terms of helping Ukrainians are very, very minority. I guess there are. I mean, we have to be honest. Every society is driven by pretty much the same dynamics. The question is about the proportions. And I think the proportions in Poland and among Polish people are better than right. Excellent, and the understanding of the need of helping Ukrainian people is tremendous. And we hope to keep it that way, by the way, because, as I said, the challenge is right now to keep up the level of help. We're not going to be able to do it alone, by the way. This is why our work among the diplomats and governments to governments involvement of NGOs from other countries, because we need to structurize it for at least two reasons. First of all, to keep providing Ukrainians with the help they need, but also to go on with this accommodation process, which is very much needed. As I said, the first and major distinction from any other refugee crises in the near past was that Ukrainian people were admitted to Poland and accepted to Poland without building refugee camps. So that's the first distinction. We want to keep it different. We are actually setting up completely new standards of dealing with the refugee problems. And if we are successful with that, in collaboration on the international scale, we might actually create something that is beautiful, will give us guidance how to do it in the future in other places, in other countries. Bottom line, how to structurize and how to accommodate refugees to make them fully empowered members of the societies, of communities. So they, in fact, will not be refugees by definition we know, but rather a form of immigrants, guests, or however you want to call it. So that's a huge chance at this. And coming back to your question, well, the vast majority of Polish people understands that and supports that. This is why you don't really hear the voices against it.
Let me first welcome my wife, Debbie. And I also want to say hello to Adrian's wife, Anna, who it may not be here, but she's always here in spirit because she and Adrian are very, very close couple. It's a beautiful couple that we love hosting at our home. And I want to thank Gabriel Bell, my associate, our dear friend, member of our family, whose whole life is dedicated to helping refugees and has worked for the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in Geneva. And Gabe put together this entire event in just 4 days because of how much he cares about refugees. Gabriel Bell. And Gabe means it. Gabe means it. His whole life really is to care about people who have, yeah, it's right over there. And let me also say in a moment of, it's an emotional issue for me, this whole thing. Adrian, I know you're going to be you already are Consul General, second highest ranking diplomat in the United States for your country. You're going to be a great Polish leader because you give insights into things that are just impressive. I so enjoyed hearing what you just said, that maybe this whole crisis will lead to a different view of how we see refugees, that they're not just given these temporary statuses, right? You said in a discussion that we had together, and let me just ask you to comment on this and I'll move on, that Poland is thinking of giving permanent residency. That's 2.5 million people, really? Permanent residency? Wow, it's like, is that what's happening?
They are receiving something, the equivalent of something that you would see here as a social security number, which is the identification number, which allows them to being included and basically to the health system, to the education system, being legally employed, which is important.
It's like an American green card.
So, in a way, the thing is that there is a huge distinction between that and something that we know as a refugee status. By the way, in my past, I'm still consider myself young, but I've done a lot of things in my past, and among them was also working as a journalist together with the NGOs, providing help, the humanitarian and development help in some of the African countries. I visited so many of them, and I visited quite a few refugee camps. And what I learned is people are coming there, with only a couple of items on them just to stay there for a week, for months. And when you visit these places, there are new generations that are being born there. So the mistake of not getting these people properly included to the communities becomes a problem for everybody. And the more time passes, the bigger problem it becomes. It is really a chance with this this is probably the biggest refugee crisis we face for years globally. But there is a great chance that once we set up this standard, we will have a protocol that we will be able to follow in the future crises. God willing, we will not have a need to do so. But if there will be a situation like that, we might have a completely different protocol to solve that problem and that issue.
So it could be a template for further conflicts as well. Alicia.
By the way, I just wanted to say something else, because I've heard that already a couple of times, this referral to that image of Poland that didn't want to accept refugees in the past. I don't want to talk about the attitude of some of the media towards Poland, that we have our political differences. Poland is run by conservative governments, so obviously we are allied with other conservative governments in other parts of the world, not necessarily with more liberal governments in some part. So there is a lot of PR involved, but in the discussions that had been theoretical, we've been criticized for something that remained until the very end very theoretical. When we faced the situation where we had to act, we acted, I think, what was right thing to do, and we proved that this judgment of Poland in the past was not really reflecting the reality about Poland and Polish people. Remember that when it comes to the international law and the refugees, there are always major destinations for refugees to come. And in that particular case, Poland is obviously a natural destination for Ukrainian refugees, and Poland is responding as it's supposed to respond. And I think that should really end the discussion of what is the attitude of Polish people and Poland towards the refugees or the refugees crises.
Alicia, Adrian referenced the feelings on the part of some Poles that there's unfinished business between Ukraine and Poland in terms of its past. And maybe maybe he's referring to the fact some people in Poland feel, oh, we're helping these people, remember what they did to us, etc. Many people in the Jewish community feel that way. I cannot tell you, I have told you actually, how many people have written to me saying, Ukraine was, quote, worse than the Nazis during the Second World War. 80,000 Ukrainians voluntarily joined the SS. I could go on, but I'm not here to enumerate just statistics. And they contrast that with Putin. They say Putin is a friend of Israel, and Putin's so friendly to the Russian Jewish community, and Russia defeated Hitler and fought Hitler, et cetera, et cetera. And I've kind of said to them, well, first of all, Judaism doesn't believe in visiting the sins of the fathers upon the children, but I said to them, so I don't get it. So if Putin was invading Paris, and Paris was a collaborator of Hitler, quite literally, the Vichy regime, and flattening the Eiffel Tower, would you say nothing? But people look to you, especially because of your unique position in our community, not just as a national leader, but they look to you as someone who, the grievances of the past are something you should be feeling personally, like these people who murdered your family, et cetera. Does that play a role in how you see this thing with Ukraine? How do you respond to Jews who say, oh, are you really going to forget what the Ukrainians did to us? And
listen, what is the quintessential accusation against Jews that haunted us through the Middle Ages and even into the 20th century? And even in some form, if you look at a lot of the anti-Israel sentiment that foments today, continues. It's the blood libel. It's the idea that we have done something we didn't do. But worse than that, it stems from this idea of we're Christ killers, that generations ago we did something wrong, and the sins of the past are to be visited upon us in the future. And as you said, Shmuley, that's something we reject completely. And we reject it not just for ourselves, but we reject it applied to anyone. And the speech that's most on my mind when you ask me this question is my father speaking to the German parliament in the 1980s, I believe, late 80s or early 90s. And he said what are some of the most profound words that I remember to this day. He said, "The children of killers are not killers, they are children." We should never visit upon subsequent generations responsibility for what happened before they were even born. It's morally wrong, and in fact, it's the very weapon that has fueled anti-Semitism for 2,000 years. How dare we think about using that weapon on others? And if there's a comment to be made on the sanctity of memory, realize that when my father so respectfully yet passionately challenged President Reagan on Bitburg, what was the background to Bitburg? The background to Bitburg was that Helmut Kohl was convinced of the need to whitewash the past. He wanted to make it okay for SS veterans clubs to meet in Germany and have that be an okay thing to do. He was very much looking to move on from this concept that many people who were still alive, these wartime crimes they had done, it was time to put it aside. And my father rejected that and asked President Bitburg in his famous words, he said, "That place is not your place." And I think that has to be true today. If we have problems with things that happened in the Ukraine or things that happened in Poland, the appropriate thing for us to do is turn to these government officials with whom we can have excellent relations and advise them to seek a different path when it comes to memory. And of course, celebrate when they do amazing things like Poland has been doing with its acceptance of refugees. Sorry, that was a little long-winded.
That wasn't long-winded at all. I think that was a very important response to how a lot of Jews who are committed to Jewish identity feel. And I understand that Poland is still very haunted by the specter of the Second World War, as are the Jews. It's one of the things that unites us, Adrian. You know, when I go to Poland, every person, you feel the specter of the Second World War because of the devastation. You feel it now. The cities were razed to the ground. Like even when President Biden spoke in front of the Warsaw Castle the other day, the first thing they said is, it's not the real castle. It was razed by the Germans, and it's, you know, you have like a beautiful castle that's not real because none of the city remains. I'm going to start going to questions, and please direct them to Adrian or to Alicia. Yeah, go ahead, please.
James Golden. Thank you.
I only have one request. I should have abided by this myself. We're going to keep all the questions short. Go ahead, please. Thanks.
All refugee situations are created by military failures. The Polish had a tough time when they didn't get supported outside of Warsaw, and they got an enormous amount of problems. The Israelis got bailed out by Richard Nixon with a huge weapons resupply. Currently, the refugee crisis into Poland is because the Ukrainians lack the weapons to counter Putin.
Right.
And the whole world, if you watch Fox and CNN and other places, are simply not focused on winning the battle and keeping people in their homes. Everybody's talking about all history in the past, and these people, every time Zelensky gets on the TV, he says, ammunition not a ride, weapons, not meals, and no one's given it to them.
Yeah.
The Jews should be learning when they landed in 48 on the shores of Israel that without a gun, this is all BS. Because if you can't defeat them with a gun, and I'd like to just hear what you plan on doing or what influence you have, because the only solution to refugees is military.
Okay, and I'm going to direct that question specifically to Adrian because the Polish government offered their MiGs, their Soviet-era MiGs, which can be flown by Ukrainian pilots. The United States famously turned it down, which was kind of shocking to many of us. Wall Street Journal was very critical of the Biden administration for doing that. What is the position of Poland right now in terms of giving greater arms to Ukraine? And I ask that specifically not only because of what happened with the MiGs, Poland, but Adrian, but because Poland tried for years to kind of alert the world to the danger that Vladimir Putin posed. Now we kind of all know, and President Biden says Article 5, the NATO alliance, etc. But you guys wanted American troops in Poland, which you got finally, years ago. And the first speech that even President Trump gave in Europe, I was there. It was in Warsaw, 2017, summer 2017. And it was Poland wanted a stronger alliance with the United States because it saw Putin as a threat. So how do you respond to the need to arm those who are fighting Putin right now?
So there are a couple of layers in that question. I think that this is not exactly accurate to say that Ukraine has not been provided with the weapon, because it has. And then actually, if you look at the numbers, I think it's probably one of the largest supplies that has ever been offered to any country. The question that is obviously valid is it enough? And obviously, since we don't see the war to end, we might say it's not enough. Poland is a member of NATO, and we're not going to do any move that is outside of the NATO structure for different reasons, but mainly because the key objective is to keep the NATO united. I think one of the goals of Putin is to actually create the split, the hole in that structure which will help him to the erosion of NATO, because he might fight and win individual countries that are within NATO structure, but he's completely unable to win NATO as the alliance. So from our standpoint, it is important to coordinate the moves with our allies. That's what we are trying to do with the mix. And I think it was interesting discussion where we found out how far can we go at this present moment. But obviously, needless to say, the discussion is ongoing. So obviously, we on different levels, we have this discussion every day to see how Russians are advancing in Ukraine and what help could be provided to Ukraine. Now, if you look at the structure of the NATO alliance, there are different voices, and some of them will tell you that we should provide the minimum assistance or maybe even withdraw from providing weapons. And there are countries that are vocal of provide the most of the assistance. And Poland, from the very beginning of this war, was on the side to get involved as much as possible to finally become ahead of Putin. We have a little bit of a feeling that we are responsive in terms of the moves by Putin, and we should actually do something that will put us ahead of the situation to change the dynamics of the war. But again, it has to be decided by NATO as the alliances, as the alliance, in order to make it successful. And yes, to what Rabbi Shmuley said, this is very true that Poland was very much vocal and was in the avant-garde of the countries that were very vocal about true Putin's intentions and how to fight him. In 2008, late Polish President Lech Kaczynski, who, by the way, died in the crash of the airplane in Smolensk in Russia, he was in Georgia at the moment of Russian invasion there, only with a few other leaders, but leading them to go to Georgia. And he was speaking to people of Georgia, saying exactly that we know that for the time being, the aim of Putin is Georgia, but he will go after Ukraine, then Baltic countries, and maybe eventually even Poland. So we know that in order to end this once and for good, we must take actions that are, well, courageous. But then, again, we have to take under consideration that no one wants the escalation. And even President Zelensky is very vocal that he doesn't want to see Ukraine as a battlefield for another years to come. So the coordination, I think, here is the key. So to sum it up a little bit, I think that on one hand, Ukraine has been provided with the weaponry on the very extended scale. Poland is vocal to do even more, but we will coordinate it with our allies to make it efficient and successful.
Let me pitch that to Alicia for just a moment. You know, you spoke about one of your father's speeches where he challenged American President Bitburg, but there was also where he challenged President Clinton at the opening of the Holocaust Museum, and he spoke about Kosovo. and the inaction. And a lot of people credit your father with the fact that President Clinton later bombed Kosovo. So weapons are an important way of stopping these human rights abuses, mass murder. What about giving Ukraine more weapons? Are we doing enough? Can we really speak about stopping these atrocities without really arming the people who battle the evil?
I've heard, quite a bit of chatter of, well, what is an offensive weapon and what is a defensive weapon? Somehow we should only give defensive weapons, not offensive weapons. And I think that is a critical mistake, because when you have one country that is clearly the aggressor and another that is the victim, supplying any sort of weapons to the victim, those are defensive weapons. They are protecting themselves from unprovoked aggression. And I think we need to recalibrate around that kind of thinking.
So you want to see Ukraine being armed more heavily?
Ukraine needs to be armed to defend itself.
Including planes? No-fly zones?
Listen, these are the very difficult decisions that, the Biden administration has to make. How much do you dare provoke a tyrant who has nuclear weapons at his disposal? I can't say that I have all the information needed to make that decision, but on the margin, I'm going to tell you that directionally, there are certain debates that I think are appropriate to shut down. And this concept that certain weapons are no longer defensive, I think is a mistake. All weapons are defensive when they are handed to the victim of an unprovoked aggression.
And a final question on this, Alicia. So, okay, we do have to arm those who are fighting the aggression. Your father was a very big critic of the Iran deal. You mentioned the Iran deal as well. You said that Iran, the whole issue with Putin is he has nuclear weapons. If he had a conventional army, I don't think we would be as cautious. So is that what you're concerned about, that Iran can exert the same kind of nuclear blackmail against the United States?
Yeah, for sure. Look, note the following. Ukraine has been extremely fortunate to have as staunch and warm and open-hearted an ally in Poland as they have across the border. Tell me, if a nuclear Iran arms Hezbollah and becomes more belligerent to the point where they send armies into Israel, which country is Israel going to run into? Where are we going to send our refugees? We already know what the rallying cry of those who hate us is. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. We'll be going into the sea. And by the way, I extend that same thinking to Taiwan. If there's military action from China against Taiwan, tell me where the Taiwanese are going to go. Nowhere.
And in speaking about Israel, I have to ask this question. You need not answer it, but I have to ask it. The big story today is that the Ukrainian representative in Israel left a meeting with Benny Gantz, the head of the IDF, because Benny Gantz, this is allegedly referred to the conflict in Ukraine as opposed to the invasion, as if it's two sides. Israel's always very careful about that as well. We know that words mean a lot. Then you have the fact that yesterday, Yair Lapid, the foreign minister of Israel, condemned the Bucha massacre by name, saying it was Russia, and the Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, condemned the atrocities without saying who committed them, right? Do you have an opinion on this?
An opinion on Israeli politics?
No, an opinion on how...
I think it's a Chil Hashem that Chametz on Pesach is being invoked as the reason to bring down the government. That's what I think.
Okay. We have to do a whole discussion about that. I'm going to comment on that, if I may. I love Israel with all my heart. I've dedicated a lot of my life to defending Israel. I have 3 children who served in the IDF, third going to the IDF. They're much more heroic than I am. The Jewish people are a light unto the nations. We are a moral people. Israel is the great bastion of liberty and democracy in the Middle East, and it dare not take any position that is not emphatic about what is right and wrong. Putin is evil. He is not Israel's friend. He is not the Jewish people's friend. Friendships like that, they never last. They're only self-serving. And there is nothing that's bad for the world that is good for the Jews. Putin is bad for the world. And I want to hear the government of Israel state emphatically that Russia is murdering and slaughtering innocent people. and that the state of Israel, the most, after the United States, the most majestic democracy in the world, I want to hear Israel state emphatically that we are against this tyrant. The fact that, and I understand why Israel's in a tough position, I get it. There's so many Jews who are at risk under Putin. I also understand that Israel's own security is at risk because it has a border with Putin in Syria. But ask yourself, how did Syria come under Putin's control in the first place? How did Putin allow 600,000 innocent Arabs to be murdered by Bashar al-Assad, who just wanted to be free? This man is the foremost face of evil in the world, and we Jews must condemn him emphatically. Next question, yeah.
If we were able to take that policy and put it everywhere else in the world, is there something that Poland is doing special to, I guess, take only the refugees from Ukraine and kind of identify which are Ukrainian refugees versus other kind of immigrants from somewhere else, and kind of how would other countries utilize some type of policy to be able to accept more refugees without basically opening the door?
If I follow the question, we did absolutely nothing to make any distinction. It's not like Poland accepting only Ukrainian refugees. We open, basically, it's not about the nationality in that case, I think. And in most of the cases of when you have people fleeing the war zone, it's about people who are willing to or escape their country from slavery from any form of harassment, and that's exactly what Poland did. We opened up, as I mentioned, we opened up our borders for people of all nationality. I have to tell you, we receive the update every day with the chart where you have people, as far as we might identify them, where we see the nationalities of people crossing borders. And obviously, vast majority of them are Ukrainians, but not only Ukrainians. There are a lot of people from different, even distant part of the world who were in Ukraine and they have the same right to save their lives. This is the bottom line. So I think it's rather the territory where they escape from, which is obviously adjacent to Poland. So their natural choice is to go to Poland, also to some other countries as well who are providing help for Ukrainians. But we are not in a position to make any distinctions between Ukrainians and non-Ukrainians.
I heard the phrase that talk is cheap. We had a nice discussion, but like many in my generation, we're angry. We're so angry. How in today's modern world could I feel like we're just digressing or regressing, whatever the word is. Like I would have hoped that we would have evolved to handle conflict diplomatically. So my question to the three of you, each Shmuley, Adrian, Alicia, if I were able to give you the executive powers to snap your fingers like Q from Star Trek and just make it stop, what's the solution? How do we make it stop?
Alicia?
Look, I'm going to sound like a neocon here, so I apologize in advance for what I'm about to say, but I think that the U.S. for so long has been the superpower that set the terms for the way the world works. And when we are strong, and when we indicate that we are willing to put military might behind our view of what is just and what is appropriate for civilization, the world, I think, more or less goes along with us. And when we are in a place where we don't feel we can do that anymore, where we spend time broadcasting more about what we won't do in response to terror than what we will, I think that opens the door for weakness. Now, God forbid that US troops should ever be put in harm's way needlessly, but I think that there is a need for military might because it is what causes diplomatic negotiations to go the way we need them to go when we know that we are prepared to do what we must and when our opponents know that. So I think that that is a major item on the table that needs to be thought of and discussed.
You know what? I think that there is no one answer to it, because if there would be an answer to it. I guess we could stop this war as we speak here during this conversation. And I think that eventually one thing will work better, the other one will not work at all. Maybe there will be a combination that will make this war to stop. But I don't know if you remember or if you heard, it was I think a couple of days ago, statement by President Zelensky. Great wisdom that comes out of it is that he said he wouldn't dare. Someone asked him, how can you handle negotiations with Russians, seeing the footage or being at the spot, seeing all these bodies, harmed children and innocent people, how can you handle it sitting at the table, or your people sitting at the table with the enemy and have this discussion? And he said something, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something that he wouldn't dare, he would never dare to stop negotiating, so basically close any channel that might potentially lead to ending this war. And we must do the same thing. We must go through every possible channel and explore every possible avenue, hoping that eventually one of them or a combination of them will lead us to ending this war. And one more comment on what you said, the anger. It happens that I had psychology classes, and when you deal with the angry management, some outcome of it is that you need to direct this anger towards something that is productive. And I think that overall, I agree with Rabbi Shmuley that we are allowed to say it out loud that we hate evil. And it's okay to feel it that way. The other thing is that we do, it's good that we feel that anger, because first of all, that means that we still remain human beings and we have that moral compass inside of us. But also, we can use that energy to help others. You know what? I think that many Polish people helped and are helping Ukrainian people exactly because of that. Because they feel angry. Because it has an impact not only on Ukrainian people, but also to Polish people. You don't want to feel that such horrible events are happening just right at your border, right across the street in some cases. It makes you feel angry. So how you respond to that? One thing is to feel helpless. There's not much you can really do. You're not going to run negotiations. You're not going to provide weapons. Although, there are attempts even here in the United States. Pretty much every day we have phone calls of people, Americans. They barely know where Ukraine is located. They want to go there to fight, to help in fighting. So, there are different ways to direct that anger. But in many Polish people, that anger converted into just go there and help those people, out of being angry on what's going on and angry on those who are setting our world on fire. So it's okay to feel angry, and I hope this will translate to something that will be helpful to Ukraine and Ukrainian people. Anyway, it might.
The first thing I would do is reform the United Nations. President Zelensky said yesterday, why don't we close the UN? Well, we in the pro-Israel community have been asking that question for a long time. That's an exaggeration. Reform the UN. I don't want to close the UN. As a humanitarian organization, the United Nations is amazing. Feeding the hungry and taking in refugees, and where Gabe worked for the UNHCR, although it's been politicized with Israel. Our Palestinian brothers and sisters have not been absorbed as refugees by, 40 Arab nations that surround Israel for 75 years. Israel absorbed 900,000 Jewish Arabs from Arab countries, Jews from Arab countries, who are, and of course there's 1.5 million Arab Muslim citizens of Israel. I can go on and on, but in essence, the UN does a good job on the humanitarian issue. Politically, it's a catastrophe. I would get rid of China and Russia from the United Nations Security Council. Security Council is a joke, having two tyrannical countries who have veto powers. You can't push. We couldn't even put one resolution through all the Obama years for the catastrophe in Syria and using poison gas in Aleppo, Damascus against Arab children, because Syria was being protected by Russia, by China. The UN's a joke. And it's right here in New York, and a lot of our anger has to go into reforming that institution. This was not Franklin Delano Roosevelt's vision when he mapped it out on a napkin during the Second World War. The idea was to stop conflict, and the UN is just a place to protect. It protects tyrannies today. We don't have a resolution against Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine, because he's actually, not only is he on the Security Council, he is in the United Nations Human Rights Council. I mean, sorry to laugh, it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. Is Iran on the council? I can't remember. Like, you know, it's just a joke. Cuba, first thing I would do is reform the UN. The second thing I would do is I would certainly give Ukraine more weapons. And they need more weapons. And MiGs from Poland, why was that even like a discussion? And the United States should be taking more Ukrainian refugees, God willing.
Well, just to put a little balance into this very outspoken judgment on the UN, tomorrow I think, UN probably for the first time in the history will vote suspending Russia from Security Council, which is a great deal, even the fact that it will be a voting, we don't know where the result.
From the Human Rights Council.
For Human Rights
Yes,
Council.
yes. Because they're a permanent member of the Security Council. They can never be taken off. But,
That's
yeah,
right. But the first permanent Security Council member being voted out of the.
Yeah, that is very historic, Adrian. Thank you. Okay. Go ahead, Phil.
So I think one of the most valuable things from this discussion for me, actually it's a tribute to those who were murdered during the Shoah, which is, and having been in Poland twice, the events, as you, Adrian, alluded to, it hangs like a fog. It informs everything, I think, about Polish thinking as it does Jewish thinking. And I never put the connection together before to think that somewhere deep in the subconscious, maybe there's a feeling is this time we're going to act differently, big time. So that's a tribute to the people who were murdered. I do want to say just a couple of things about numbers. We, the Jewish people, are the only people who have not regained our numbers, the only party to World War II that have not regained our numbers, although the Polish and Russian people suffered greatly. We are the only ones who are at 16 billion and we were 18 billion before. I also want to say something very briefly about military spending. The U.S. spent $6 to $7 billion monthly in Iraq. And we spent $4.5 billion monthly in Afghanistan for years and years and years. And so far we've spent between 2 and 2.5 billion out of a $20 trillion economy. It's kind of peanuts.
You mean on the Ukrainian refugees?
No, military.
Oh, military.
$2.5 billion military to Ukraine is peanuts in that, in the grand. I want to say one thing in terms of the Jewish community. How come we don't look at oligarchs as like mafia dons? That's what they are. All of these Jewish oligarchs have a lot of money, and I guess they've bought a lot of respect. But let's face it, they're like the mafia don that beats up the shop owner and then goes to the church and gives the priest money for orphans. No oligarchs, no Putin. To me,
But let's be fair. There's oligarchs who are not Jewish, obviously.
I'm talking about our people because I know from the inside.
You have an issue with me being an oligarch? I mean, come on, Phil. Why does it have to be in public?
I'm talking about all the Jewish oligarchs. I'm telling you, inside, it's wink, wink. There are, that's disgusting, number one. The government of Israel makes me want to vomit. Because what I was taught as a kid was, well, the Pope didn't speak out. Because he said, look, all of the priests and nuns are going to get killed. I can't. And we discredited that. We said that's morally bankrupt, but it's kind of the argument that Bennett is making now.
Are you speaking as an American or as an Israeli?
All Jews. And finally, I want to say, I was at Zatar about 9 or 10 years ago. And what a tragedy. Nobody said anything about the 600,000 Syrians that were murdered. We have to acknowledge, maybe I'm sounding like a neocon, it was the ultra-progressive left that hurt Obama but turned a blind eye because he didn't want to screw up the Iran deal. And the left in Israel, who acted as if it was a non-event. So,
Okay, I have something to say about that, but I'm going to go to Alicia first, because there was criticism of Israel and the Jewish community.
Look,
Alicia, you are Israel and the Jewish community.
look,
I share Phil's strong feelings that, and yours, Shmuley, that Israel needs to be condemning clearly the aggressor in what's happened in the Ukraine. We haven't forgotten about you, I promise. He's going to get you next. The thing that, sorry, what is the question you want me to answer, Shmuley?
Just anything that Phil said.
Look, it ties back to what I said earlier. When America pulls back its presence throughout the world, as we did in Syria, then you have the Russians come in and create an intolerable situation for Israel, where in order to get to Hezbollah, they have to fly through airspace controlled by the Russians.
and it's even worse. The irony is Obama relied on Putin to take away the chemical weapons.
It gets even worse, because in the current format of the Iran deal, do you know where the enriched uranium goes for safekeeping?
Russia.
It goes to Putin.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, it just gets worse and worse and worse. This young woman in the front has been trying to get our attention for some time.
Okay.
So, thank you, Shmuley, for creating this, as you always do. Pretty amazing. I think we all agree.
Thanks for coming, Judy. It's so nice to see you. Judy's a world-renowned relationships expert. Thank you for joining us.
I think we all agree about how we feel about Russia and how we should create these sanctions. My heart goes out to the Russian people, because while we are devastating, as we should, the Russian economy, we're also devastating the lives of all those Russian people, who many of us have friends there. How do we deal with this?
Very good question. So I'm going to respond to that and then respond to some of the other things. We're going to finish within 4 minutes, so that may have been the last question. Let's just see.
I would like to also.
Yeah, of course. Firstly, Elisha said very eloquently, quoted from the Torah and his father, that we don't visit the iniquity of the parents on the children. But there is the iniquity of the parents. So I'm not saying that Russia's like that, but first make the point. The people of Germany in the Second World War democratically elected Adolf Hitler into power. There were only 4 attempts on his life in the 12 years he was in power, and only 2 were serious. I consider Klaus von Stauffenberg one of the great men of the 20th century. I like that Tom Cruise portrayed him in Valkyrie. I spoke about that on Shabbos. But he had the support of the German people to the very end. So the German people, not that every German, God forbid, was a Nazi, of course not, but the German people supported Hitler, right? The question is, did the German people support Vladimir Putin?
The Russian people.
I'm sorry. The question is whether the Russian people support Vladimir Putin. The polls say they do. Are they reliable? I'm not here to demonize the Russian people. I like the fact that President Biden said we have no beef with the Russian people. But Putin is a monster who is tyrannizing his own people. That is very true. But the only way to liberate the Russian people is to enact these sanctions right now. If it's short-term pain for long-term gain, we have to do it, because Putin has got to be stopped, or his aggression will go into Poland. It'll go into the next place. And we learned that from Hitler. I said Putin is not Hitler, but there's a template that these dictators use. Phil, as to what you said, the word sickened by the Israeli government, I have to strongly object to. I love Israel. I fight for Israel. I defend Israel. So, but unlike the great Elie Wiesel, who is the light of all the people who are here, and Elisha is his, I say this from the heart, Elisha is his worthy successor. Elie didn't always feel that, criticism of Israel had to be done in the right context, because it could be misused. Of course it can. Israel voted to condemn Russia at the beginning of the invasion at the UN. Israel condemned him many times, Lapid especially. It's Prime Minister Bennett who's been a little bit, and probably Bennett says, to his credit, that he's following what Zelensky wants him to do. Zelensky wants him to be a mediator. And if he's a mediator, he has to be more, less strident. And Zelensky has maybe asked him to be a mediator. So you have to see, and then Israel says, we have a genocidal threat from Iran, so it's easy for all of you to tell us, don't condemn Putin. But Putin controls airspace, the Iranian proxies in Syria. I get all that. So it's not like Israel doesn't care about the moral question. Israel's simply saying, we had one genocide, we we have the United States about to give this guy his nuclear program back, and we're worried about it. I understand that. And even so, I say that Israel has to be more emphatic in their condemnation. I said that before your question. Because we are a light unto the nations. That's why. Because people, the reason why Christian evangelicals, 80 million strong in the United States, love Israel is because they love the Bible that says the Jews are a light unto the nations. And we can never compromise that mission. We taught the world, do not murder. We taught the world. And by the way, it comes up with Poland as well. Because whenever, we'll do another night about this, there's no time. But whenever we bring up with our Polish brothers and sisters as well, you know, you have to understand, we felt that more could have been done by the Polish resistance to help the Jews, etc. And the Polish resistance fought Hitler all those years. Their response is, oh, you're judging us. If we hit a Jew, our whole family was killed, all of our kids. Whole cities, whole communities were killed. We understand that. And even so, we say, but you got to do the right thing, right? So right now, Israel's saying kind of the same thing. You don't know what it's like to have Putin on your doorstep. These are difficult questions, I admit. That's why I love conversations like these, because they're real. But I feel Israel has to do more, and I've written that. I published it on the Putin thing. And I've never thought... The only thing is that we Jews feel that Russia has such a horrible history with the Jews. Stalin was almost genocidal against the Jews himself. Well, how ironic that he's the one that liberates, Auschwitz. It's like, it's all crazy. But the pogroms of 1,000, I could go on. And then suddenly Putin is like giving his salary to the Jewish Museum to build the Jewish Museum. I was like, oh my God, this is the Messiah of the Jews. So I get that. And even so, we have to have the larger moral question. And we're all debating that. Okay. I've said what I wanted to say tonight. And I now want to turn it over to Adrian and to Alicia. And as my final word, Adrian, thank you for hosting us this evening.
Hold on.
If I can only just say.
Before you wrap it up.
No, I'm not wrapping it up. I'm turning it over to you and then to Alicia. I'm wrapping it up because I don't want to scare anyone that I'm going to talk anymore. Churchill famously said that if the British Empire lasts 1,000 years, they will say this is their finest hour. God willing, the people of Poland will last thousands and thousands of years, and the world will say, having taken in 2.5 million refugees, that this was their finest hour.
Thank you so much. Well, frankly speaking, we always hope to become a better, so I hope it's not the finest moment, it's one of the finest for the moment, but we strive to be even better in the future. I need to make a comment with all due respect about the approach towards the Russian people. Obviously, they are not directly responsible for what is going on in Ukraine, but I think most of you see the photo that has been all over internet with the body of 10 years old girl naked, with the signs of rape, with the hands tied. And you know what? There is no symmetry and no sympathy to the people who suffer from not being able to purchase the goods that they were used to. It's not the moment to feel compassionate towards what they go through, because it's nothing to be comparable with the atrocities and the horror that Ukrainian civilians, children are going through. And I'll tell you more, from the Polish standpoint, from the bottom of my heart, this is the time for Russian people to wake up. And the price is high. Obviously, they are afraid that their lives might be at risk. But you know what? For past hundreds of years, Polish people were standing up for their freedoms and for their rights, risking their own lives in so many uprisings. When Poland was occupied, when Poland was fighting with the enemies. And we know even the recent years when the Solidarity movement made the Iron Curtain collapse and brought freedom to the entire war, it is possible to stand up and be vocal where we stand and whether we support or are against even our own government. Because eventually, as much as we know that this is all driven by Putin, it would be too easy to just call it a Putin's war. It would be much too easy. So there is a lot of things that can be done by Russian people, and as much as we don't make them perpetrators just by being Russian, as the nation, that there is a time for them to wake up and watching these photos, what Ukrainian people going through, we must all support the sanctions. And we, by the way, just as a comment, again, I mean, I try to give you the full picture of what is going on, but Poland is very vocal on the high sanctions and supporting Ukraine military as well. And there's no question about who is perpetrator in this war and who's a victim.
I have nothing to add to that. Thank you for hosting us, Adrian, and thanks to this great audience.